So, Phil Beisel, you're back because I said we would be back, and this is probably Sunday morning that we're doing this. We were talking about the All In podcast. Elon Musk on that All In podcast talked about possibly competing with Wikipedia. What a great idea, which was kind of a second time, in my opinion, that he's mentioned this idea because he also talked about rewriting the corpus of all of human knowledge.
Yeah.
So that struck you as it struck me.
Yeah.
Both times he said that it was, quite an interesting idea. But I'm going to, because this is your show, not mine, I'm going
Mm.
to let you kind of run with how this grabbed your brain and caused you to start thinking about what Elon has in mind. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So let's start with if you haven't watched the All In podcast with Elon, I highly recommend it. Very, very information dense, and I I think they did a great job of walking all the topics, um, and all the companies largely. Um, so I was really excited. The only thing they didn't do was hit up on
Yeah, right.
the Boring Company. If anybody doesn't know, Elon actually has a company called the Boring Company that actually builds tunnels. So hence the name, um, like the Vegas Loop.
Right.
Yeah. So there was a stunner here, where he started talking about uh, Wikipedia. It was the lean-in was they were talking about training the next version of Grok, and Elon has intimated many times that we're running out of written knowledge to train, and that the body of written knowledge is flawed. And a lot of us, I think, or a lot of people listening, thought it was a dig at Wikipedia. Um, and
A good thing to dig at.
Wikipedia deserves some abuse here because it really it's very bizarre. I mean, if you ever had a thought, a fact in your brain and you wanted to go edit Wikipedia, you'll find out that whatever you edit, it gets removed in about 2 milliseconds by um, some editor that you'll never meet who probably sits in his mom's basement or something. It's very weird. It's very weird. But that said, what's the problem here? The problem is that uh, we're running out of uh, the knowledge base, the corpus of all knowledge is really written by humans. That's already a compression, right?
Yeah.
We have to. So if you're writing like if I write an article on FSD, I probably have 300 thoughts in my brain. Some of them are completely ridiculous. Some of them belong in the article and end up in the article, and some of them just can't make it into the article. So the ones that get in the article is some compression of that entire um, neural process that I have to try to do to build the article. And that is true of every subject matter. If you go to a Wikipedia page on any subject, it doesn't cover every connection point to that subject. It links maybe. The beautiful thing about our you know World Wide Web is the hyperlink. It can link to other topical material, but when it links to another piece of material, it doesn't necessarily explain the context and how that material relates back to the topic. So
Let me see if I can visualize this. So we have World War II, which involved, I don't know, 10 million soldiers from 25 or 30 countries at least. Maybe it was more than that, with hundreds of thousands of aircraft, ships, tanks, maybe millions of some of those, uh, all kinds of personnel on the ground that were not necessarily at the front lines or are actually fighting forces that were supplying these. We had all the supply chains that were involved. We had the economies that were happening at that time, and Wikipedia might give World War II 10 pages.
right, right,
And
yeah,
then,
and then
even if they give a bunch of links to some of the specifics, if you went to in the entirety of everything that could be remotely
yeah,
related to World War II, maybe you would get to, even if it was 10,000 pages, it wouldn't begin to tell the story of World War II. It is a compression.
It is a compression. And it's not to pick on Wikipedia. Every documentary made on World War II is got some narrow focus, it and also has a bias, an opinion by these creatures called humans that bring bias to bear. So let me pull out and say what I believe Elon was really trying to say. And I put this on X the other day when I said decoding Elon. What I believe that he is trying to say at the most fundamental level is that an AGI, artificial general intelligence, something that is better than a human in thought, um, must remove the human from the loop. Now, at first, that sounds scary, and let's treat that a bit later in this discussion. But what I think he's saying is, look, if we look at how we've trained our LLMs today, that includes Grok and ChatGPT. Those are a class of systems called LLMs, large language models. And note the word language in there because it's talking about the written language. What we've done is we've trained them on this corpus, this body of web-based data, the web crawl. There's a common web crawl, there's some others. Wikipedia is a big source for that, but it's not the only source. And then there's a whole set of books that exist and written since we've been printing books. And there's a huge body of knowledge in books that is not codified on the web, right? I mean, it's not. So important to bring books to bear, although the total amount of data in books is far smaller than the total size of the web, and the web is growing much quicker.
Right.
But the problem with the web is it is not complete. The data is not complete, and it introduces bias in all sorts of directions, not just political bias. That's the common thought, but all sorts of bias gets entered into that equation. And so the question is, if you're going to try to build an intelligence smarter than a human, it would be really hard to just take everything from the human race I mean, it would be like saying, if I want to build an intelligence better than a set of dogs, right? I mean, it's the same kind of thing, right? So, I mean, we're just some animals roaming the planet, and we have a good cognitive capability beyond dogs by some measure, but only some measure. Only some measure. We don't have the next set, whatever that is, of knowledge.
So again, I want to see if I can come up with a great visual here on something that most people have never heard of. Well, they've heard of the first and not the second. So you got something called crowdsourcing. And we've come to believe that things like these online betting systems, the stock market, and other things that measure the crowd, especially when they have money invested in their decision, that this crowdsourcing gives us better solutions than we might otherwise get. And there's another thing that's called stadium theory. And stadium theory is that tomorrow, when we're all watching the NFL, or today, some people watching the football games in the college level, there's going to be a play, and even with slow-mo and even with amazing cameras, that play is going to come down to inches or the angle of the camera or whatever else. Everybody that's wearing the purple is going to see it one way, and everybody that's wearing the blue is going to see it another way, and that is crowdsourcing. And yet half of those people are wrong.
Yeah.
So these two elements of crowdsourcing are in complete.
Well, on top of it, it may be not a single person in the audience of both halves actually saw what really happened.
Exactly.
Right. No, this is exactly what Elon's saying. And what he was saying, which was profound or at least noteworthy, is he's saying, hey, we're using a lot of inference compute to correct the omissions, to correct the bias. And that's like, whoa, what are you doing? Now, I don't know what he's doing there. And I think that's a bit of the secret sauce. And I think they are doing some a somewhat interesting thing that I would say to you with no real evidence is that it's sort of possibly in line with how they do community notes on X.
Okay.
Community notes is a very interesting system that's an open source algorithm that allows the X community at large to mark a post as erroneous.
Mhm.
And in order for that post to be marked as erroneous, people from opposite sides or have to come together, you know, the blue team and the purple team or whatever you said, they have to come together and agree.
Mhm.
Right. So a lot of people wonder why certain things don't get community posts because they're so ideologically potentially divided that nobody comes together ultimately, and that's why the community post doesn't show up on some posts. But what I think he's saying is we've got some algorithm, we've got some technique that we're going to go do research across this corpus and cross connect information by using some components of Grok itself. Some, in other words, train the new AI using a lot of inference, which is crazy, to go figure out what's missing and then score it somehow and inject it back. And so someone, one of the podcast hosts, suggested that they could go write a Gracipedia out.
Yep.
In other words, they could take Wikipedia in, they could correct it,
Right.
and they could output something called Gracipedia, which I also wrote a post on saying that's a great idea because it sort of open sources the idea, open sources the input data, and we can see what fed the beast. We can see what, when Grok 5 comes up, we don't know. We all don't know what fed the latest OpenAI ChatGPT model. We don't know what fed. We don't know what books were omitted, what books were included. We don't have that sense of the knowledge base that went into creating the this LLM, right? We don't know that. So that was an interesting suggestion from one of the hosts, and I thought, Elon could do something in that way to say at least this is what our input data is.
Yeah, let me take a quick sidebar. So one of the things I love about Grok, and I think some of the other LLMs do this as well, but I know that Grok does it very well, is if I hang out while my question is being looked at
Yeah.
on Grok, I can watch the reasoning process.
Right.
I care enough, I can go back and I can go line by line and look at the reasoning process.
Yeah. There's a little source
Right,
icons you can click.
right.
Yeah.
So when Grok finally spits out the conclusion, I look at the conclusion, I go, it doesn't really comport with my thinking, but I want to know more about where to come from.
Right.
How did you reason this through so I can go as deep as I need to? And so last week I got into a big long argument with Grok over something that wasn't really that controversial, and Grok was giving me a liberal answer, if you will. And not liberal in terms of the amount of content. It was, sorry,
ideologically
liberal result. And so I looked at the source work, and it was Wikipedia, Newsweek, it was all 100% from the left. And so I just told Grok, I said, from now on, in every single answer that you give me, because now you have memory, and I want you to remember this. If I ask you a question that has political, consequences, I want you to give me both sides. I don't want you to not give me the left side, but I want you to make sure that you also bring in the right side when you come to your conclusions. And I want to be able to see that you're providing some information from both sides. And so then I suggested on a post on X, I said, if you're going to write this Crocopedia, wouldn't that be one way to do it? Is to make sure that you're maybe always offering two sides to these controversial issues.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the output would look like, but I do agree with what you're saying is that, and that's why I brought up the idea of if they were to, what's the secret sauce? What's the technique they would use? And I would say it's something akin to how they do community notes, that they blend both sides. They look for distillation of agreement and where there's disagreement, and they pull that together in some way, and then that's the way they're correcting the bias out of a system. And I think we have to recognize, let's pull this up a level. I think we have to recognize that bias isn't there to, if we're looking for a, as Elon would say, a truthful API. I'm sorry, AI.
Yeah, sure.
Truthful AI. And he thinks it's important. We'll talk why that is true in a minute. And if we're looking at one that is truly intelligent, we really got to get beyond human silliness, right? I mean, human bias, humans, you know, what humans what humans have written about the world are largely information from the victors. You know, the people who've won wars tell you why their side won the war, and the side that lost is lost in history. Uh,
And as my uh, English professor wife likes to tell me, most of the books were written by the rich.
yeah, yeah, sure, sure, absolutely. So there's this whole injected bias, not just ideological, but you know, winner bias, economic bias, and doesn't represent the body of knowledge. So, in order to jump into this thing called AGI, I think what Elon is saying is we got to get beyond that. Today, we have this body of knowledge that's in the written form, uh, and some level of video, right? In other words, we take in a documentary published by National Geographic on something or whatever. Um, but this is human knowledge that's been distilled and compressed. And when we compress, it's lossy. We've lost a lot of stuff. Right? There's two types of compression in the kind of computer science term. There's compression where you can compress something and then you can recover the original.
Yeah.
Then there's what's called lossy compression, where you can compress something and you don't have the original. So a good example is when your iPhone takes a photo, it goes through a process, a processor called ISP, image signal processor, and this compresses it into a JPEG or a PNG or you know whatever format is not all the source data. A lot of the data is lost, right? And you can never recover that data without having the original data. That's why Apple has sort of at the primary, they have that HEIC format, I believe it's called, or I don't know what, I'm not very familiar with it, but there's a format that's kind of the raw data, what they call raw data format. Even that format
It's still
isn't
compressed. Yes.
isn't the light spectrum that entered the 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 camera to start with, right? So there is this compression, and in the case of knowledge, that compression can leave stuff out, and it could inject bias for from lots of different dimensions. So what Elon's saying is, look, if we want something that's beyond human intelligence, we can't stop at the human body of knowledge or what we think it is, because it's not complete, and two, it's full of human reasoning, right? Where if we're trying to get something that's smarter than a human, we can't stop at the human reasoning level. It's the same comment I had about FSD. How do we make FSD ultimately safer than a human? Well, for the most part, FSD is imitation learning, right? It's taken in an extreme amount of human decisions in driving, which are pretty poor, by the way, right? And of course, they've done an amazing job picking the best of that decision, but the best is only the best. And we have to admit that at some point, even an F1 driver can make a critical mistake uh, in a vehicle driving on a, yeah, yeah. So how do we get better than that? Well, we have to move past imitation learning, and that's why FSD in its final product is both, it's like 90%, I'll call it, imitation learning and 10% reinforced learning. And reinforced learning essentially takes the human out of the loop. Other than the judgments of the human, like the reward, there's a reward associated for not hitting a human over. I mean, if a car has to hit a human over a dog, what should it do? Well, there's a human judgment in there. It says, don't hit the human, hit the dog.
Don't ask PETA.
Yeah, exactly. But there, yeah, no, I got your point, and it's really an interesting point because there's a human judgment in here,
Right.
right? But most of that human judgment is pretty rational, and it's not very ideological or bent on other types of bias. It's kind of like hit the stop sign over this. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. It's like, well, what if I slow down too much and a car hits me from behind? Um, what happens there? Well, am I injured versus, you know? Um, so ultimately, in order to build a system much safer than humans, we can't just imitate humans. We have to go beyond that. And FSD is kind of ultimately building that system, which is imitation learning, reinforced learning combined, and then jumps past the human driving potential by 5 times, 10 times, and then of course much more. So this is the same thing he's saying about AGI. We have to take the human out of the loop. We have to remove the human from the loop. And if we do remove the human from the loop, then we can result in a theoretically more intelligent AI. And secondly, we can introduce a more truthful AI. Now, truth is a judgment on some people's in some people's minds. But if you were to imagine, uh, a race more superior to humans who were to make kind of judgments over humans bias, they may say, well, your judgment is just your judgment. It's not, it's not binary logic that got you to some truthful piece. It's what you're inserting into the equation. So at the end of the day, what I think he's literally saying is we are building a system here in Grok 5 that is starting to first correct the corpus of knowledge we're using to train the system. And that's step one. And then step two, which he is not talking about yet, is moving to real world data. So real world data is literally data as collected by sensors that have nothing to do with the human in the loop. And real world data would include everything Optimus sees, everything a vehicle sees with the 8 cameras, and all that information can train to be part of essentially an information corpus, right? It can be part of that information, and it's much heavier. It's less compressed. It's not compressed by human bias or human, so there's not that kind of omission. The omission is, where does that Optimus go? If it's you're trying to get a sense of you know asking Optimus to describe the perfect golf course, but it's only visited 100 golf courses out of 5,000, then you still have, I don't know how many golf courses there are. I don't play golf, but you still have an omission of information. But you're getting closer. You're getting approximately closer to some larger body of information that's training an eye. Plus, what's interesting about Optimus observing or any type of observation light is that now you could go further, and Optimus is in real world data isn't just observing, it's experimenting.
Mhm.
It's literally trying things out and potentially trying things out using its own reasoning
Right.
model, not the human telling it what to do, but it's trying things out on its own to see how
And,
it works.
and let me pull that down just a little bit. So we have experimenting, like for instance, in a lab where we tried different things in the lab and we mixed different things together. And that can be done either physically, or it could be done uh, theoretically.
Mhm.
We know what happens if you add this and this together, and you can do this in symmetry, not just in reality. And that's one of the things that's really helping us in biology right now, is all that capability. But then there's another level of experimentation, which is the crossing the creek thing that people now use, I think is the standard, which is there's 3 rocks, there's a little stick bridge, and then there's something else. There's 3 different ways you can cross. Your brain looks at the creek, looks at the 3 ways to go across, and experiments right now as to which one of those is going to be the safest way or the fastest way, depending on what your problem is, to get across that creek. And so the car is a great example, is making those experiments all the time, experimenting on all the possible pathways it might take to deal with whatever the situation
Right.
is. And then it could do that in an experimental realm as well, with bigger questions, or questions that are going to be part of the permanent way that Grok speaks to us. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
so
No,
much.
I think that's it's a bit true. I mean, what we don't know about is what is going on in the human
Right.
process to do that experimentation. And was it data trained? Was it trained by some kind of evolutionary blueprint that gave us the reasoning to know which path to take? Because after all, why are we doing that? We're not just looking for efficient path, but we're looking at some primordial level, looking for something that doesn't harm us, right? To take a pathway that wasn't a treacherous choice, right?
We might have,
Um,
we might actually be looking at it, uh, depending on our brain, we might be looking at it as which one is going to provide the most fun, or which one is going to
yeah,
provide a risk that we want to take, because we're right now looking for, we believe that that risk is going to make us feel more alive, as they say. So there's all those
well, I
possible.
mean, and just but to distill it down to the simple is you could take two humans and say, and a third human, and the third human instructs the two humans take the safest path, and and those other two humans take different paths.
Right. Yes.
And so there's something going on there that is some judgment call, and this is beyond this discussion, and I don't really
So,
have that. But I think what what we're saying here is that we need a lot more data in these systems by orders of magnitude. We need to source this data from real world, where real world also includes the physics of the real world, kind of like the unbreakable truths of the real world. And we've devised through Newton to Einstein to lots of others this idea of what the physics model of the world universe is, and we can break that up into Newtonian, quantum, all these other these ideas, but we probably haven't really cracked the nut. We really don't know what some of the fundamental truths are. We're into approximating those truths through our current reasoning abilities. But we may find that, as I think Elon said, that a true AGI discovers new physics.
mhm.
It literally discovers new physics and can experiment on its own. So the first step is just collecting more data, if frankly, and that allows that. Well, actually, I guess what you could say is that Elon is saying the first step is to take the corpus of data that's currently training the LMs and correct them or complete them uh, to train a much more truthful, correct, better than human intelligence AI. The next step is massive amount of new data sources in the system uh, without necessarily those things collecting the data source, making judgments about or interfering with the data. And then the next step is probably the reasoning models of these things like Optimus actually doing live experiments and building that reasoning, its future reasoning from the outcomes of those experiments without a human in the loop.
So as you're just talking and as we're talking, I'm thinking about, the grand experiment that was uh, 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 the encyclopedia, and then Wikipedia, even a grander experiment. The Wikipedia problem is that it has to be cheap. Wikipedia is doing it as cheaply as they possibly can. The sources are all free, 100% free. And Wikipedia doesn't have a lot of money to spend on improving the sources. And I'm thinking to myself, if I was going to I mean, we get the logical things that can be corrected, like you say, starting with physics is pretty much immutable, at least as long as God continues to not mess with it. It's the same every single day. You can count on it every single day. The sun is going to rise at exactly where we think it's going to rise. Then you can get to things that are a little more questionable, whether it's quantum or whether it's, some elements of physics that we haven't quite figured it all
Well,
out
I
yet.
mean, our models of physics, right? Which is, it's not that the physics is different. It's just that
Models, yes.
we have models on top of that we're trying to describe the physics, and we approximate to reality, and then possibly sometimes debate the physics, right?
And then
The
we get
competing
down,
models.
right. And then we get down to things like history and what happened in history or what is happening yesterday or
Yesterday.
5 minutes ago in history. I
Yeah.
mean, we just had the Charlie Kirk murder, which all of us followed like by the minute, or the people that liked Charlie, loved Charlie, followed by the minute. And the reporting was all over the place. And people were, this is what happened, and 5 minutes later, well, no, that wasn't what happened.
Yeah.
So we have all that kind of stuff going on. So as I was sitting here filtering that through my pre-brain, it seems like what you would want would be a room full of experts. Maybe they would be on YouTube like we are right now. I mean, not YouTube, what do you call it? Zoom like we are right now. But you have your room full of experts about what happened between England and France during the Second World War, whatever. And they're having this discussion around the existing corpus, and somehow between them, with a range of people on the spectrum of philosophies or thoughts or the way they've come to their conclusions, they come to better conclusions, are really, really good, combined and or multiple. So in this case, we've got okay, we've all agreed. There's 12 of us. We really cover it. And there is really only one conclusion. This general made this decision, and this is what changed the shape of the war. But on this other thing, we've come to three conclusions. Either he changed the future of the war, or he partially had something to do, but it was also this and this. And here's the third. Anyway, so we could end up that kind, if we had that kind of money to spend, and maybe it's still free. Maybe there's 12 of these guys that would come into a Zoom.
Well, I think though the thing about all of this is that the end extent is that we can't really get to the finish line on any piece of knowledge. For example, we could say this general was instrumental in doing this thing in the war, but this general, but why didn't the other general show up? Well, the other general was fed food by this woman that was not clean, and he ended up, being sick for 5 days. So isn't it her who changed the course of
Right.
the war? I mean, and how far can you go back? Well, okay, well, what's wrong with her food source? Well, it was this farmer, and you keep going. And so is there a truth there? Really hard to do without a simulation where you're running all things to ground.
Yeah.
You're running a simulation of all possible decisions, which are effectively infinite, running them to ground and trying to say, what's the key decision here that was the most effective in changing the course of the war? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So I look at it as just sort of a thing in my simple brain of just collecting more and more information and letting these reasoning systems pull that together. And of course, one of the outcomes of that can be, well, a certain group of people think X and a certain group of people think Y. At least you have X and Y in front of you, and it's not just the Y isn't just removed from the corpus.
Exactly.
Right? If the Y is just removed from the corpus, then that thought, economic, political, is gone, and we don't know what it is. But we also have to expand that corpus greatly, and we have to go beyond the human compressed reasoning model, which is written language, and we have to go into real world data and start to gather data. Now that doesn't help the historical elements. We can't look backwards in that, but we can
can we get a video of that particular battle? No.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but the thing about it is, let's look at the circumstance where you talked about a play on the field at a
Yeah.
football game, and the red team thinks one way and the purple team thinks a different way. And arguably, it's possible, as we just said, not a single person saw it, and yet maybe with enough sensors, cameras, one of the cameras at 120 frames a second, picked up the reality of where that football actually touched the ground.
I've got a better one.
Hmm.
Sorry, but I got a better one.
No, sure.
So you've got 5 cameras, and none of them actually got whether the foot was on the tape
Hmm.
on or on the chalk. But using the 5 cameras together, you
Sure.
could actually
Precision.
simulate, you could absolutely
Yeah.
decide
Yeah.
that the foot touched the tape or didn't touch the tape.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you can do some reconstruction of reality, but it's just about data at that point, really. It's a model.
See, but my point, I guess my bigger point would be you can take that back to the historical problem. You can agree on the 12 best sources
Hmm.
of that piece of history. You wouldn't have to have the people in the room. These are the 12 best writers, the 12 best articles, the 12 whatever about
Right.
that
Right.
particular time. Now the LLM can truly take those 12 sources and this is what Grok does
Yeah.
beautifully.
The live synthesis of the
I'd say,
knowledge of them. Yeah. 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 Um, yeah. I mean, there's just so much here, and I think the next evolution of this is really is more data. And whether that's Elon's talking about corrective measures involved in looking at one of the things that's very interesting about the web is the web is starting to grow with information that's come out of LLMs.
yes, yes.
So this is a very bizarre problem, and it means that LLMs, as it ingests information, doesn't know what. Yeah, no, I mean, there's no information provenance. We can't go back to sourcing this information because it was. I mean, I could make an LLM write a whole article on FSD. I could publish that article on the web. It could be completely wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't even check it. You just no judgment from Phil. Just put it out there, and then you can ask a Grok or ChatGPT in 3 weeks from now about this thing, and it will tell you something wrong because the LM got it wrong. A competitive LM got it wrong, and now a new LM doesn't know that information was published. Right? I mean,
It's a problem. It's a problem.
it is a problem. In fact, in some ways, it's a bigger problem. Well, maybe it's not a bigger problem, but we worry so much about AIs doing generative images, right? Oh, we don't like this person's ideology, change their shirt color, and now they're this person, and we'll publish the hell out of that, and then someone will tell us that's a fake, and we used to call that Photoshop. Now we're really talking about AI, and of course those AIs will get so good to generate video that is literally indistinguishable. We'll not be able to know.
Becomes
And,
real data.
yeah, and I'm sure there are companies working on uh, suitable factual watermarking of yeah, and also just watermarking the fact that an AI built the thing in the first place, right? I mean, at least we know, like we can say, oh, that video wasn't sourced from really cameras, it was made up. But oh, guess what? These cameras, I hate to say it, we were talking about inference earlier. All devices get inference in them. All compute devices will be AI devices. And, Apple just did a announcement of its iPhone lineup for the fall. And one of the things that while they've, by most measures, fumbled the ball on the overarching idea of Apple intelligence, they're using AI in many, many components of their product. And one of the things that they're doing is they're using AI to be a tool that determines how to frame a picture based on the number of people, in a selfie, and to widen the selfie to gather but there's a judgment call being made by the new signal processor. The old signal processor was pretty rigid and it's did a couple things. It was very digital. It now we've got something that's making decisions on what the best picture of reality is.
Yeah.
And yet its decisions alone can exclude or include components of that reality that are maybe important to the story, but are removed. So, for example, was the president really at this event here? Well, the AI um, blurred the background because it wanted to frame the president's face in the picture. And now we can't tell from the photo whether the background was real or fuzzed out by the AI. So, yeah, that's a rabbit hole. I mean,
Well, I think you're right. So number one, I am all for Gracipedia. I am excited. I hope he does it. It would seem to me that this would be something that could be done quickly. It wouldn't be that hard. Now it depends. I think is Wikipedia is 100% open source, right?
well, here is the problem. It I think when I saw Elon's, little things going in his head on that problem, uh, it isn't. So if we look at Grok 4, lean into Grok 5, it's a whole corpus of information that's a web crawl of information that's used to train that LM. So the question is, he's attempting to correct, rewrite not just Wikipedia I mean, Wikipedia is probably just the funny little example that we can use and that represents, 12% of the corpus or something. I made that up. I don't know. Um, but, what about factual omissions in books that have been brought to bear? And so I think he was thinking, well, what the hell am I supposed to really publish here? Do I just republish what I found per source? And do I take certain sources and elevate them? Like if the source is Wikipedia, do I rewrite Wikipedia and call it Gracipedia? Or do I rewrite, um, this other website, Newsweek or whatever you alluded, some other website? Do I push this back out and say, here's a more corrected version, how we've corrected the version, through our AI. And I think he's thinking, Jesus, where do I stop? How big is this thing that I'm supposed to publish? Um, and that's a super interesting judgment call because, in a sense, if Wikipedia would just be a small lens into the larger corpus of information that's used to train that. If you look at hundreds and hundreds of research papers from Nature and
Right, right.
that stuff is not. I mean, it may be discussed in Wikipedia at some level, um, but it's not necessarily the source information that talked about this revolution in biology or something that occurred, right? So it's really complicated. I mean, in a sense, if you start thinking about publishing back all your source as you start to ingest more real world data, uh-oh, because there is a point here where the very act of taking that data in and compressing it is inherently lossy because it's too expensive, and actually it's more than expensive, it's impossible to store the original data.
Yeah.
Right. So, if you just took the entire corpus of FSD data across 6 million vehicles running right now, or assuming, and you tried to think about and do a computation of the number of exabytes or whatever the heck that is, you would find a number that vastly outpaces all the storage by all the hyperscalers by 10x. I don't made it up, but so it's hard to know. It's hard, an LM itself, right? If you think about an LM, I think we said this a couple times even in this discussion. An LM is a compression. It is a highly connected compression of data. It's not just some random compression of, taking Wikipedia, compress the text. No, it's interrelating. It's creating this high dimensional space is the word used. Although, and if you watch videos on LLMs, it's kind of interesting what's going on. But it is, first we tokenize text, and essentially we essentially are removing the sourcing of whether that's in a sense we're removing the sourcing of whether that's at some level what the language is as the input. But we tokenize, and that's one compression, although that isn't really lossy. We can get back to the original data from those tokens as long as they're strung together from the original. But then once we put them through the training process, the LM model, like you look at a couple hundred terabytes of source information, trains your favorite ChatGPT model, and it ends up being 2 gigabytes or something. I don't know what the final size of the model is. Well, that in 2 gigabytes represents all that.
Right.
In some form of judgment, in some form of everything, it represents all that. So now if you start to increase that, you really can't go back and get to that source at all.
Right.
Even what's, I don't know, and I'm sorry that if you do this kind of the common crawls that are done, that I don't know, I can't say with certainty that there's this thing called common crawl, which is like a capture time and place of the web as we know it, right? The web is kind of all interlinked through these hyperlinks, and we can crawl it. Google's been doing this for years with search. It's how it built its search index. Other people have crawled the web for a billion other reasons, and obviously and then that's been cemented into something called a common crawl, and we don't really know whether ChatGPT uses that directly or indirectly or has built their own. I don't know, at least. And so, but at least common crawl is sort of some version of the snapshot of the web at some moment in time, but it certainly isn't other potential sourcing information that goes into these things.
Sure.
This is a lot.
Yes, it is, but it's fascinating, and it's like as much as maybe I only care about what Wikipedia has to say. I mean, really care, like once a month, and maybe other people never care what Wikipedia has to say. I think that whatever our encyclopedic source or whatever our source of data, our the information that we're getting in order to make decisions. I mean, we've just seen the whole thing blow up with the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're making financial decisions based on these horrible numbers that turn out to be completely wrong.
Yeah.
Well, we make some of those same decisions by looking up what that general did in World War II, and then we think, well, I'm a general now, and I should do that because it worked for him, and we have the wrong information. So, it's I think Elon's desire to get to truth is a solid goal.
Yeah, and it's obviously
it talks about getting to more truth.
Yes, let's be clear. It's a fantasy to say I get to truth, because but it is arguably a good goal to reach for truth and remove non-truth or non-bias or omission from information, and that lets us build an intelligence that leaps over the human. If we just kind of look at the human and go, well, that's an animal on planet Earth, no better or worse than the population of dogs or cats or mice or rats, or and we say, okay, let's build something that's more intelligent, by the way, as a tool for humanity. I mean, this is the thing that has to be expressed here. The fear concern, which it's easy to run the fear line out very quickly from this. So a more intelligent AGI therefore will make judgments about um, humans and then eliminate humans because it'll see it as, those things can happen, right? I mean, these things could happen. I am not here to
Yep.
tell you they can't happen, but why do we want to at least be aspire towards this thing called a truthful AI? Because Elon gives examples, and I'll give you one. Uh, if we have green people and we have orange people, and there's a whole set of articles on why orange people are better than green people. Uh, the AI could conclude that for the preservation of something called people, that since green people are better than orange people, or whatever I said, the AI should eliminate orange people. But that's just a pure judgment call by the population of green people who overwhelmed the corpus
Right.
and pushed their thoughts onto, and maybe they were the victors in a battle or an election or whatever it might be. Or maybe they're just good at
Manipulating.
manipulating the corpus of data. And so the reason we need a truthful AI is to eliminate that type of bias, which yields, and these judgments aren't, oh, Optimus is evil and wants to, no, maybe it's just a preservation act of, it sees two people on the corner and it looks like they're going at each other and one's orange and one's green. And it concludes, I have to go get rid of orange because the green is the better person.
Right.
Um, this is the thing that is important to eliminate in these, whatever your judgments on things, it's probably a really good thing that that your judgments or my judgments are not the only judgments on this planet.
Right.
And I would easily say that about myself. Yeah, easily. Sometimes, and some of my judgments from last year are not the same judgments I make this year.
Exactly.
There's no continuity. I mean, well, there's some continuity, but there's not objective continuity from the day I was born to this moment.
Right. Right. Yeah. Otherwise, boomers will be saying that we are the best.
Of course, of course. So anyway, just to finish this conversation, I think the unpack of this is that what Elon was really trying to say at the podcast is that in order to seek these next models of Grok, which I intend to get closer and closer to the line of artificial general intelligence, I need first to correct human knowledge. Correct. We'll just use that, put that in quotes. We'll get too judgmental about what correct is, and we won't get too prescriptive about what correct means because we don't know we don't know the technique. And then we'd say correct is step one. Step two is to go beyond, to eliminate human in the loop ultimately and get back to kind of source. And we can certainly move forward directionally by more real world data being ingested into these AIs.
All right. Yes. Well, there you go. So for those of you who never attended your philosophy one class,
Yeah,
we tried to
we
help.
just, I felt very weird about half of this conversation because I feel like I'm speaking about philosophy and know nothing about philosophy anyway. But I'm just talking about the engineering realities of these things.
Well, you know what? The LLMs have changed philosophy forever. Philosophy is not static, even as much as Socrates and Plato, et cetera, still have cogency in philosophy 1A. The reality is philosophy changes as
Well, it's yeah,
as
it's a malleable thing, right? For sure.
definitely. All right, Phil, as always, a great fun conversation. And to all of you out there, it has been great talking to you.